I'm going to pop that out of the way so that we can get started. So in case you have never met me before or never been on one of our webinars before, my name's Emily. I work at Trellis. I'm the partnerships lead, which means I get to build fantastic content for our charity clients with our amazing partners. Trellis, we are a virtual fundraising software, and we focus on being the all-in-one software specifically for your big fundraisers, your galas, your golf tournaments, all of these fundraisers that incorporate a few different revenue driving options, which Sara is actually going to touch on later, all these different ways that you can kind of incorporate fundraising elements into your event. That's what our platform can do really well. A fantastic donor experience, which we're also going to be talking a lot about today. So it's a perfect collaboration. All these takeaways that you have from Sara and Natasha, Trellis can definitely support, which is really exciting. And Sara and Natasha are going to be able to take your next Trellis fundraiser to the next level, which I'm really excited about. So enough about me. Who is Sara? Who is Natasha? These are two of our fantastic partners. I've actually worked with Sara before. We recently posted a blog post on a really similar topic. So if you want to dive into this further, you can find that blog post on our website. Sara and Natasha are both in the event consulting and event planning world, here to help you design and experience and really plan out all of the different stages of your fundraiser. So whether you're in the midst of your planning, whether you've just started, whether you haven't done anything at all, there's definitely ways that you can work with both Sara and Natasha separately, together. We're all here to support you on your fundraiser. So I'm going to pass it off to Sara and Natasha. I will be monitoring the chat, so pop your questions in there as they come up for you. I'm going to be back at the end just to help with those questions. But for now, it is time for Sara and Natasha to take over and teach you a ton of really valuable knowledge for your next fundraisers.
Great. Thank you so much, Emily. That was a lovely introduction. So before we dive in too far, I'll get Emily to launch that second poll. This was also in your registration form, but again, we just like that refresher just to see where you're at. And this is talking about, are you going to be hosting an event in the next year? So I know that some charities have just finished their fiscal, so this could be in this fiscal year if that makes more sense for you. But we'll give you a couple of seconds to enter in your answer there. And while you do that, I also want to mention that we do want to keep this session as engaging as possible. So I know that some of you are in the chat already, so go ahead, keep using that. Some of you are just messaging us as panelists, so I do encourage you at the bottom of your chat function to change that to all panelists and attendees. This is great. So Sara will talk about fundraising events sort of in the next year, so we'll park that and come back to those answers in a bit. But coming into this session, we really want to know, how are you feeling? Virtual events, as we've gone through this pandemic, we're now a year in. I know that it's still new for some people, so coming into this session, are you excited to learn about what virtual fundraisers are? Do you feel like you have a basic understanding and you're just curious about how to up-level that fundraiser? We'd love to know how you're feeling, where you're at, and we'll try and make this session as helpful as possible. But hello, good morning. My name is Natasha, so I run a sustainable events company based here in Vancouver. Before I moved into my own events company, I actually started in the not-for-profit world. I did a lot of signature fundraising events. I did some corporate giving, and now I get to fulfill both of my loves. So I help organizations really amplify and leverage their mission by letting them focus on their mission and what they do, and I take over and help them on their event planning journey. But I will hand it over to Sara to do an introduction of herself as well.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Natasha, and thanks, Emily, for having us. My name's Sarah, and I'm the founder of Charity Shift, also based in Vancouver, Canada. I've worked in the nonprofit space for the last 12 years and the last 10 years in fundraising. So fundraising is absolutely what I love. I've been doing consulting full-time for about a year and part-time for about a year before that. And I work with mainly mid-sized and small charities, some that are brand new, some that have been around for quite some time. And I really work with them to help them understand and see what's possible when it comes to fundraising. I think especially now that we're into year 2 of the pandemic, there's certainly lots of opportunities that have come up and different ways that we can be looking at ways to fund our organizations. Certainly, of course, virtual events are such a fantastic place to take a look at, what's out there, where our supporters are, and really kind of explore what's possible when it comes to fundraising. So let's jump in. All right, so just to touch on what you'll learn today, we're going to talk about building an inspiring and exciting program for your guests, strategies to increase your revenue and also your audience reach, and proven methods for engaging and exciting your guests during your experience. As we've mentioned a few times now, feel free to pop any questions or comments in the chat. We love to hear from you, and we'd like to make this as interactive as possible. So this session really, it's quite high level to get you started on your planning. Consider it as more kind of an intro or an overview. And for customized solutions that are specifically right for your organization, Natasha and I would love to speak with you. We'll talk about that a little bit more towards the end of the session, just what we have as an offer for our attendees today. So virtual events are here to stay. I think our poll results showed that I think 75% of you are planning a virtual event this year and 25% are maybe think of it. I think 2020 organizations either flat out canceled their events or they pivoted from an in-person event to a virtual event. Right now, feedback from organizations and donors right across North America, regardless of what the restrictions look like in the regions, the majority of them are either staying fully virtual or potentially doing a hybrid in-person and virtual model. But for the most part, organizations are doing away with a typical in-person, ballroom of a hotel, large gala fundraisers that we might have seen in the past. I think this is an exciting moment for organizations where we can take a look at what did we do well in the past, what worked really well with those large scale fundraisers, and how do we take that online? A couple things that I think are really exciting about this opportunity and this time at the moment is thinking about your audience. So that's why I included these photos here. You might have a family gathering from home. You might have somebody just who lives alone that's joining just by themselves. And you might even have people who are hosting small little parties in their homes with their bubble that are celebrating sort of like they might have done in person a couple years ago. I think thinking about who might be joining and who's in your audience for the first time ever. People who are no longer bound by the physical, financial, or health limitations. I like to give this example when I'm speaking with clients is that an organization that I worked with last year, a health charity, it really reminded me about the possibility and inclusion that's offered in a virtual space. That particular gala for that health charity had been running for many, many years as an in-person event. But unfortunately, the people who were benefiting from the event were never able to attend it because of their health limitations. But in a virtual format, they were all easily able to join from home. So really impactful to be able to recognize those people who are able to join for the first time. And it's important when you're doing your events to acknowledge and recognize the people who are joining you for the first time from all different places. I think also another event that I did, I think we had people from 12 different countries, which is incredible because people are no longer bound by time and space limitations. They just go online at the time that it's live and they're able to join from anywhere. I think it's important to make sure that people feel included and part of the event, regardless of where they're viewing from and who they're viewing with. Um, Thinking about, Natasha will go into much more detail in just a moment, but thinking about when you're building your program. So what does it look like? So speeches and pre-recorded video, making sure that every moment is engaging. And you really want to make people feel like they're with you on a journey. One of the things that I like to mention, someone that I know in the event space had said this to me a couple months back, and I really took this quote to heart, and I hope that you do too. And that is the idea of organizations being concerned about what they call Zoom fatigue. So, oh, everybody's tired of, being online and being on video calls and that sort of thing. But this event planner said, people are tired of Zoom, but they're not tired of Netflix. Why is that? And I think it brought up a really interesting point. And the point being that when we're watching Netflix or other TV or streaming, we don't notice the time going by because the content's been curated for us. It's well produced. There's an exciting storyline. We know what to expect. So we know, is this a 30-minute show? Is this a 90-minute show? We're entertained and we're involved in the story. We get the information that keeps us engaged. And especially thinking about this from an event perspective, the visual is playing such a big piece, right? If we think about in an in-person event where somebody might just plainly be standing on a stage and speaking, that's not going to work in the same level in a virtual space. So thinking about ways to keep things fast-paced and exciting and engaging. And I think another point to mention here is that making sure that all of your tech issues are smooth and seamless. Having that production support and making sure that your guests at home are having an exceptional experience is really important. So I'm going to turn it over to Natasha for just a little bit more on that.
I love that. I love the Netflix reference. I've heard it used a couple of times now, and I think it's so, so true, right? Who at the beginning of the pandemic went on a little bit of a Netflix binge? That would be me.
Yes. And maybe now too.
And maybe now because we're exhausted. But let's backtrack a little bit. So before you even start in on that event planning journey, I think it's really important that you deep dive into what are the goals and objectives? Like, why are you hosting this virtual event? Is it perhaps for organizational awareness? Are you looking for exposure to new donors and really expanding your reach? Is it a thank you to your current donors? Are you trying to up level, maybe take them up a notch in their monthly giving program? Are you using this as a way to garner media and maybe use it as a press opportunity? Those sort of goals and objectives will help really inform what type of event and what type of content you put into it. And so I just want to provide a couple of questions that might help you in that sort of reflection process. So again, what are those goals and objectives? What are you really hoping that your attendees will achieve from this event? And if it's done well, what are you hoping that they walk away with? How do you want them to feel? I think it's really important. So Sarah talked about the visuals, that production, that sort of entertainment piece. And I think in this virtual space, that's so, so important. There's different expectations and we all engage with that content differently. So having that really clear from the outset will really help in that planning process. And it's also helpful if you align with that and do that as a team exercise. It's also helpful to sort of come back to those pieces. So as you start in on that planning, doing a check back and just reflecting and making sure that what you're doing, again, reflects back on what you've planned at the beginning. And sort of as an example, so I worked with a Vancouver-based charity. They provide self-esteem and confidence workshops for young girls as they head into their teenage years. But their board and their network in their community is much more global, much more international, and not particularly Vancouver-based. So when they hosted their in-person fundraisers, it was a little bit limiting in terms of who could attend. So those international guests could donate, but they weren't really a part of that process. And so now in this virtual landscape, it's really opened up the doors and really opened up a whole bunch of new opportunities for them. So they're using the event as a way to engage new donors and really target market and use those ads to expand their reach. But it's also a thank you to the donors that have supported them that weren't local in the first place. And so again, have a think on what that looks like for you. And I'll pass it back to Sarah.
Great, thank you. So thinking about which fundraising elements should we include, and I think it's really important to frame a virtual fundraising event. I like to think of it as sort of like a telethon. Remember watching telethons back in the day, and I think they're still on now as well. But you know, those call-in shows where there's entertainment and you can see all the people in the background like picking up the phone and getting really excited, and people's names going across the screen, and that's sort of the energy and the idea that I think a good virtual fundraising event includes. And so I want to talk about a few of the different elements that are really going to drive your revenue. And the first thing to look at is ticket sales. And I often get asked that question of, well, how much should we charge? And I think it's really important to recognize that, to consider how ticket costs will impact your fundraising. So I want you to think about this for a moment. If you've never gone to an event before, you think you might be interested in it, and the ticket is $100, that's something you might have to pause to consider. If it's something that you've never been to before, looks interesting, and it's $5, you might think, well, it's $5, I'll probably go. But if not, it's a good cause, I'll just give them my $5. Statistically, when people commit a small dollar amount to something, it increases the commitment to it. I think probably all of us are guilty of one time or another signing up for a free webinar or a free event thinking, oh, I'll probably attend that, and then slips off your calendar or you just forget. So that small ticket price does kind of have a bit more of a commitment for people. Silent auction. So a silent auction, this is something that can be hosted on Trellis, where you get companies or individuals to donate something, and then you launch it a few days or weeks ahead of the event, and you get people to bid on it. So this can be really exciting. It's also something that you can include in your communications to your donors in the lead up to the event. And also, because the silent auction is online, people don't have to attend your event and can still bid on the silent auction if for some reason they're not able to attend, because that auction would be open to all. A live auction is a little bit different. It's trickier to do in a virtual space, I must admit. Live auctions are typically higher dollar value items. So, you know, in the past, we might have seen getaways, vacations, vacation home rentals, that sort of thing. It's a little bit tricky during COVID. So I would say for live auctions, to try and get items that you think a large number of people will be interested in, and to only have a few items, because likely only a small number of guests will be able to bid. And you want to make sure that every moment is still engaging for all of your attendees. Raffles are a great idea that can also launch a few days or weeks ahead of the event. So 50-50 or prize raffles are popular. One thing to note there, just to make sure that you know what raffle and gaming rules are where you live. Provinces, countries, states are all different. So it's good to know in advance what you need to do to get that license. The biggest piece of where you're going to see the bulk of your donations is fund a need. And like I talked about being a telethon, this is where your MC or your auctioneer asks the audience to make a donation. So they would start with the highest dollar amount and go down from there. At each of the dollar amounts, you want to make sure that they have tangible impact statements. So rather than just asking people for $100, you'd say, you know, asking people to donate $100 and then let them know that a $100 donation will provide after school snacks for 10 children in our program this week. And that helps people understand exactly what it is that they are donating to. I would recommend that you pre-commit donors so that you have gifts at each level. So what that means is you would, well in advance of the event, go out to your current donor base and let them know, we're going to be asking people to make a donation during our event. Could I ask you to consider making a donation in advance so that we have someone at each level? So that way your MC already has that person's name, so they already know when I ask for $10,000, I already know Natasha has already committed that $10,000, and I'm going to say thank you so much, Natasha, and hopefully that'll spur other people to make donations as well. Another great option is to have matching donors to multiply. I did an event last fall and it was incredible. Partway through the Fund a Need, we announced a matching donor campaign. So these donors had already pre-committed a certain amount. And so partway through the ask, we said to the entire audience, anyone that makes a donation within the next hour, their donation will be matched. So your donation will go twice as far. And that got people really excited, especially for our donors who weren't able to give as much. They knew that their gift would have twice the impact, which was really great. You want to make sure that your MC or your host is well informed of who your top donors are. And as I mentioned, have their name and the dollar amount ready at each giving level. So recognizing your donors and letting them feel your energy and your gratitude. So as the donations are coming in, you're saying, wow, Emily, $500, thank you so much. Wow, Natasha, thank you so much for that $10,000. This is amazing. And really get people excited and engaged. Something that I've seen work really well, if you do have the production support to do this, is to have a live on-screen thermometer so people can visually see the number going up as their donations come in. And then finally, additional items to purchase. So sometimes you might have a purchase item that's experience-based. So it might be something like a charcuterie board or something else like that, where people can really enjoy an experience at home. So we'll touch on a few more examples towards the end of the presentation. And for now, I'll turn it over to Natasha to talk about these elements and considering the design and content.
Perfect. Thank you. So that was great, Sarah. Thank you so much for all these little nuggets of wisdom. So she talked about those various fundraising channels, which I'll talk about in a second. And she also talked about audience a little bit before this as well. So those two pieces coming together really help formulate what your design and those content pieces will be for your virtual fundraiser. So again, some of those things that you can include are a silent auction, maybe there's a live component, that Fund a Need, those impact stories, and the really fun sort of innovative piece to virtual fundraisers is, what does that sponsor recognition look like? Because it's not going to be what you would typically do in person. So when it comes time to actually slot those in and actually formulate the program, what does your show look like? Let's break it down a little bit further, because there are some different ways that you can do it. You can do it pre-recorded, you can do it live. There's a term that we use in the industry called simu-live. So it's pre-recorded but shows up as live pieces of content. So in terms of that silent auction, again, you can have it launch a couple of weeks, maybe a month before your event. You're launching it with your ticket sales. That really helps to build that buzz. And also, I'll tease this a little bit later as well, but Trellis has a great new feature coming out where you can actually incorporate that silent auction right on screen. So it's really easy for your guests to join the action to bid on things while your event is happening. And that would be a live component. That Fund a Need is a really crucial live component as well. Again, one of those trickier pieces, but the two that I really want to focus on, so those impact stories. Typically me on the back end, and I know Sarah can probably relate to this as well, we like having these impact stories pre-recorded because it helps on the production side. So it helps to alleviate some of the pressure in terms of that live show. So maybe it's a fireside chat or an interview with someone on the team. Maybe it's just them on camera sharing a video of their experience with your organization. With that pre-recorded content, it can look different and it can still be interesting. but we would encourage you to have a think about like how you can, how that shows up for your fundraiser. And then for that sponsored recognition piece, I think we've all been to those in-person fundraisers where you're sitting in a ballroom and then the sponsor goes up and they give those 5, maybe 10-minute remarks, which aren't necessarily interesting or engaging for your guests, but it's something that you as an organization have committed to. So how can we shift the way that functions online? Because really, for them to do 5 minutes in a 60-minute event, that's a lot of precious airtime that you may or may not want to give to that sponsor, right? So maybe they do a 30-second commercial. Maybe it's, if they do want to share a longer segment, maybe that's them sharing what the actual tangible impact or why they're supporting your organization. So instead of just talking about the who they are and what they do and more of that selling piece, it's relating back to that storytelling component, which is really, again, like why everyone's there. So I would also encourage, when you think about the content, when you think about the programming, when you're sort of designing how you want your event to look, be mindful that your guests and your attendees are all going to engage in your event differently. So there's the introverts, there's the extroverts, there's people like me that are the ambivert. We kind of fall in between. But we all come into a space differently. And I think being mindful and being accessible in terms of how your content shows up is really important in this virtual landscape. So it's really important to have variety. So it's not all videos, it's not all pre-recorded, it's not all live. There's different kinds of content happening. So maybe you do a silent auction as part of your opener, and then you have a little break for entertainment, and then you have a fund a need, and then you close out with some more entertainment, and you have sort of impact stories sprinkled in between. Have a little bit of think about how that shows up in your event as well. So you're probably thinking, well, that's all well and good, Natasha, but what does that actually look like in terms of my event? So I'm going to pass it over to Sarah, who will give some more real life examples as well.
Great, thanks, Natasha. One of the things I think is important as well is that what we're finding in the virtual fundraising event space is that 60 minutes is the ideal allotted time for a virtual event. Any less than that, it's difficult to get all of your content in, and any more than that, and people start to disengage. Your most important pieces of content, especially your fund a need piece, should really happen within the first 30 to 40 minutes. And that way you make sure that you've got that fundraising piece while you've got the widest audience possible. I want to talk a little bit about sponsor recognition, but first I do want to mention, just in terms of pre-recorded video, an example that I wanted to share. And that was that we had an event that I did last fall. We had a musician who had intended to join us live in the studio that we were filming the event in. And he was planning to perform there live. And we were all very, very excited to have this live show. He's quite a well-known musician. And at the last minute, he wasn't able to do it in person, and he had to do pre-recorded. And so for myself as the event producer and our committee, we were all feeling a little bit disappointed, but ended up being so well received. He filmed himself basically in his living room. Some of his kids' toys were sitting beside him. There was some messy background noise. I think there was dogs barking or something, but it ended up being so impactful. And in fact, when we polled our donors after the event, a lot of them said it was their most important or most favorite moment. And part of the reason for that was just the reality of it. And people said they felt like they were actually sitting in his house with him. And so I think those are the, when we talk about live, we talk about recorded. Those are the types of recordings that you want to have. You don't need to spend much money, if any. Most of the pre-recorded content I've worked with have been somebody just sitting at home in front of their laptop or in front of their phone. So don't feel like you need to produce anything like that. So I just wanted to mention that in terms of recorded content. Going back to sponsor recognition, I think Natasha had kind of talked about having something that is not boring. I think we've all been there where sponsors all get up and say the exact same thing over and over again, and people really start to tune out, and you don't want to lose people. So what I've seen work really well in events that I've done, in one event, we had the MC actually sitting in front of a sign that featured one of the key sponsors' names. So every time she was on screen, you could see in behind her the sponsor name. Another one that I did, we had a charcuterie board that was delivered and had a menu included with it, and the menu mentioned the sponsor name. And then another one I did where the music and the entertainment was actually sponsored by one of our sponsoring companies. So lots of different creative ways that you can engage your sponsors. And I think when we've moved from an in-person event to a virtual, I think the loss of sponsorship is a real concern for a lot of organizations, because in an in-person event, you would of course be able to provide free tickets, and companies would be able to have 12 of their clients or 12 of their employees enjoy the event. And so I think what's important in a virtual space is not only making the sponsorship piece engaging for the attendees, but also meaningful for the sponsors. And a reminder, when it comes to sponsorship is not a donation and it's not philanthropy. It's a marketing spend by the company. So it's an investment that they're investing in their company to get some advertising space. So keep that in mind when you're taking a look at your sponsors, and also when you're putting together your design and your content. So I'll turn it back to Natasha for some more details about technical pieces.
Wonderful. Thank you. So the good thing is you've now planned your content, you know what you want to do for your fundraiser, but now comes the $1 million question, right? So how are you actually going to do the thing? How is this virtual event going to function? So I will preface this by saying at the beginning of the pandemic, I think we were all incredibly understanding. This was a brand new thing. No one really knew what this virtual event, virtual fundraiser landscape looked like. But now we're a year in and people have these new baseline expectations of what these events will look like. And again, based on your demographic, those expectations will probably be different. So being mindful again of who's in the room, who's your audience, and who this event is catered for. So I'll briefly go through a couple of different options. So on the left, you'll see the typical Zoom option. So you can do a Zoom webinar, kind of like what we're in right now. The thing to keep in mind is that the Zoom webinar is a more passive type of content. So the guest will really only be able to engage with you in the chat. There's no two-way communication. And it's hard to get that live feedback as an organizer, as an organization. If you're in a Zoom meeting though, there's a little bit more freedom in terms of how your guests engage with you, but it's more challenging from an organizer perspective. Your audience then has control of their cameras and mics. Many of us at the beginning of the pandemic, perhaps we were Zoom bombed, so that's also something to consider. But Zoom now has some really good meeting features. So on the left, you'll see this spotlight function. So you can basically bring center stage the person that's speaking. You can have a couple of different people. This is really good for your MC, any of those live components that you want to show up, again, front and center. The other fun piece that I love in your Zoom controls is you'll see the reaction. So this is a way for your audience to give you live sort of emoji feedback, how they're feeling. Maybe they're super excited. Maybe you're sharing that impact story and they're really feeling all those feels. That's a really sort of immediate nonverbal feedback for that pieces of content. The second option on the right, so this is me teasing a brand new Trellis feature. And I will say too, so this is an option if you want to embed Zoom into something like Trellis. So you can now live stream or soon to live stream right inside your Trellis platform. And this is great because we talked about those banner rows, those donors being recognized, and you can now do that at the top. there's that live thermometer that many of us are used to when it comes to those auction pieces. If you're running any of those in-person fundraisers, it's really important to see how much money you're making and see that happen live. On the right-hand side, you'll see you can change these. So this could be a silent auction, and I'll show a code for people to join immediately. Maybe this is sharing more about a donation. Maybe this is how you manage your fund a need. So lots of different options. Emily, when she comes back on at the end of this webinar, if you have more questions, we can talk a little bit about that as well. But I will say there's a lot of different options, and I've only mentioned a couple. So if you're looking for something more customized, if you want to really amp up that production value, I think that's where you come in. You have a conversation and we just chat about really what are the needs of your organization? What do you want your attendees to feel? And what do you want that experience to look like? And that'll change these recommendations. Okay. So now comes the fun part, at least for me on the event side. So you as a team have really come up with a program. You've designed that content. You've got a high level sense of how that shows up online. But now you need the humans and you need the technology to function for you. So I created this hopefully helpful little chart of who you should have or who you should think about having supporting your event. So on the external side, you want that AV team. If you can afford it, I would say this is probably your best investment when it comes to a virtual fundraiser. Even me as a producer, I highly recommend having them because again, they're external, they're focused on that technology. They can really support with bandwidth issues, internet issues, making sure that things are, that content is getting switched immediately and as it should. The event producer is great to have external. So this is someone that can work really closely with your AV team and be sort of that liaison between you as the organization and that audiovisual production. The live auctioneer, if you're doing a live auction, is a really good piece to have. They're professional, they're super engaging, and they can typically amp up how much money is raised with that item. And it's also probably one of my favorite parts because auctioneers are probably some of my favorite humans when it's done right. In this either category is the MC or host. So this is where I have mixed feelings. So an MC or host from the organization is great because you obviously know the organization, you know your donors, you know your people, you know the messaging and the language and that storytelling arc. But it also is limiting in the sense that you're so tied in and you have to be so focused and connected on the hosting piece that you sort of lose all the other things that are happening. So if you can afford to bring in a professional MC that maybe still has a relation to your organization, and if you can build those relationships, I think again, they're a worthwhile investment. And then on the staff and volunteer side, so this is where I like to have members of the organization sort of like planted in the chat. So they're really focused on that donor experience. So they're helping to facilitate those IT issues, but that's coming with support from the audiovisual team. So maybe they've provided you some copy that you can just pop into the chat when like those issues are coming up. And maybe that's to refresh your browser or any like your bandwidth is slow. Having people manage the chat just in general to engage with your donors. Say, hi, Michaela. Hi, Sarah. Hi, Emily. It's so good to see your face again. And then, as Sarah's mentioned before, there's tallying donations. So what does that experience look like? You might have support from Trellis in terms of that fund a need, but thinking about the logistics and how that functions. And then I'll pass it back to Sarah to give a little bit more insight as well.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Natasha. One thing I forgot to mention very close to the beginning in terms of virtual events, but I think here is a good point to add it in behind the scenes, and that is your budget. I think it is really important, especially for people who haven't yet done a virtual event, is to factor in that in a traditional event where you have catered food and you have alcohol and you have a hotel rental and you have staffing and you have decor, your budget and your expenses can very quickly become quite high. As well, you're limiting the number of people who are physically in your space, as we talked about with the audience. So if your gala costs $300 a ticket, it's a certain and small number of people who can actually afford to be in that room. So your audience is small, your potential revenue might be smaller, and your expenses are higher. In a virtual space, that's completely flipped upside down. I did an event in 2020. Our revenue went up by 235%. So we had a goal of $100,000. And we thought that was a conservative estimate, and we raised 235,000, but which is incredible. And I think important to note in there is even with production, even with a ton of external, I shouldn't say a ton, with several external resources being hired, their budget was 30%. So they spent 30% of what they would have spent at an in-person event. So when you're doing your budgeting, as Natasha mentioned, thinking about where you should best spend your resources, because you're not having those high price ticket items anymore. It's really important to be able to take a look at the production pieces and making sure if you're investing anywhere, that's the spot to invest, and be bold with your fundraising goals and expect that people are going to be generous, because time and time again, since the pandemic started, that's what we have seen across the fundraising space. So I just wanted to kind of bring that into this behind the scenes piece as well.
I love that. There's so much that we could tap into with this, and I think this stuff is the fun piece for me, talking about how this show comes together, because as Sarah mentioned at the beginning, we've experienced Zoom fatigue, but there's no Netflix fatigue, right? So this show is kind of like what I refer to as a TV broadcast. So me, I would come in as the executive producer, but you have all these other pieces happening behind the scenes to make sure that what your attendees are seeing is really top-notch, really high level, really impactful. And is telling your story really well. So I'll let Sarah go into this as well.
Perfect. So as I mentioned, Natasha and I did want to provide a free offer for our webinar registrants today. I'm going to pop that into the chat so that you've got this information. But basically, we want to offer all of you a free 45-minute coaching call to discuss your virtual events, or your ideas or your planning. And to help you really get ready for your next event, or even to troubleshoot some issues or maybe some decisions that you're working on. We'll be taking bookings within the next 30 days. So if you click on that link, you'll be directed to a calendar where you can directly book time with us. It's a value of $200 for that coaching session that we're offering free of charge for everyone today. Just to give you some examples of what we've done in some other coaching calls with organizations, these are some of the questions that they had. So the first question was, we have an existing in-person event. How do we switch it to virtual? And what are the top 3 things we need to consider? This question was, we did a virtual event last year and it was okay, but how do we make this year's event better and different? And then finally, my board is a bit nervous about moving our events online. How can I best explain the concepts and the benefits? So these are the type of questions that we can help you with, or if there's anything that we touched on today that you wanted to know more information about, or something that's brand new to you, we'd love to hear from you. So please go ahead and use that link, and we can have that coaching call together. So I'm going to pass that to Emily to wrap things up.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sarah. Sorry for the delay. I was just messaging Jocelyn. They have a big goal they're stretching for with their raffle, which is really exciting to see people shooting really high with their events. I got to start off by saying thank you to Natasha and Sarah. This was a fantastic webinar. You said it was going to be high level, and then you told us all of the exact specifics that we need to know to go and run a fantastic virtual event. And that has just come from so much of the experience that you guys have had working with other fantastic charity clients. So thank you both for all of your expertise, and thank you for such a fantastic offer. We did something similar at Trellis for a while. We were offering COVID relief pricing. We think it's a great idea to just help people out through this time. Even if you've already done a virtual event, take advantage of the offer that Sarah and Natasha have posed to you. Maybe you're running an event and you just want to start planning ahead for next time. Sarah is an advocate for planning the next event like 6 months out. So there's really no too soon when it comes to planning your virtual fundraisers. So you might as well take advantage of this opportunity while you have it. So we're going to jump into some questions. If anything comes up in the next couple minutes, pop it in the chat. We can always mix around, squeeze out some of the more generic questions to get in your specific questions, because we want to help you with the specific events that you're running. So if you have any details on your event that you want to share in the chat, please go for it. But the first question that I wanted to bring up was around sponsors. So this is a topic that I've gotten a lot of questions for from our clients, as well as people on this webinar. So when you're going and you're building out your sponsor packages, when you're looking for new sponsors, maybe you have existing sponsors, do either of you have any tips on maybe how you can find sponsors or some sponsor incentives that have worked really well for you that you've been able to incorporate into your virtual event?
Sure, I can start, and then Natasha, if you want to jump in, go ahead. Number one, and this is maybe controversial, but I do not like sponsorship packages at all. I think sponsorship should really be looked at in terms of partnership. And the way that it should be approached is finding out what's important to the sponsor. So I think sometimes, especially in the nonprofit sector, we kind of think, well, I'm doing such good work, everybody should want to support me. And it's true. But what you really need to do when you're going out to a potential sponsor or even building your prospect list is think about each and every one of them and why would they specifically be interested in you. And what that really comes down to a lot of times is audience. So it's going to be really important for you to, even if you don't know for sure, to have a handle on who you think will be going to your event. So as an example, a sponsorship opportunity that was explored with one of my current clients, I was able to kind of coach them, and so that when they went to that sponsor, they could say, our attendees are most likely women 50 and older who live within the Lower Mainland. So that really specifically, when you start thinking about, okay, who are the companies that want to get in front of that audience? What's important to those companies? And what is the message that they would want to share with our attendees? That's how you start narrowing down who your prospects will be. But really, I think the key starting point is finding out exactly what is important to your sponsors. And then, of course, warm contacts are always best. So do a deep dive brainstorming session with your board, your event committee, your staff, your volunteers, everybody you know, and find out if they have any contacts or if they have any warm leads or know of organizations that might be a fit. It's always so much easier when you've got that natural connection to start from.
I love that. And I will say too, sort of on that sponsorship package note. So I think historically, at least when I started in the industry, we did packages of gold, silver, bronze tier. So maybe it was that $10,000, $5,000, $1,000 or $2,000 package, but the benefits didn't necessarily directly correlate to what that spend was. And so now I think people, or sponsors want to invest in a specific experience. So at the beginning, Sarah mentioned that charcuterie box. It's a really tangible, it's a direct sort of perk that sponsors will get. And I think that's more compelling than, okay, so I may still spend $5,000, but it's not as abstract as like what those perks and what those benefits are. So if you can say maybe you're sponsoring the photo booth, maybe you're sponsoring those charcuterie boxes, maybe you're sponsoring the entertainment, maybe you're sponsoring the not so sexy audiovisual team. I think that's more helpful and it can be more impactful because it's much more direct.
That's awesome. Yeah, I totally agree. And from what I've heard from our other partners and charities who have kind of done sponsorship really well, is it has been incorporating sponsors into different aspects of our event. So one example that I absolutely love is there was an event and somehow it was firefighter related. I want to say that the charity was kind of somehow in support of these firefighters. And so they had this little segment, maybe it was 10 minutes long, where they had people from the team that sponsored. So say it's some organization, get people from that organization to come. And they had this like little race where they had to put on all of the firefighter gear and then take it all off really fast. And so it was this fun, entertaining piece that was very on theme with the charity and the event that they were running. And it was an opportunity for people from the organization that was sponsoring this event to come up and really highlight them in this little segment. And so that might come to surprise a few people that might be considering sponsoring because they're not used to that, oh yeah, I'm getting the silver package, because with these virtual events, there's opportunities to change those silver packages to you are the sponsor of this segment, yeah, or this charcuterie board, this kind of pre-event experience perhaps. So you can just get so creative with it. So I love those ideas. We had a question related to kind of budgeting and setting goals. So let's say you are a smaller organization and you kind of have an idea of where you can hit your fundraising numbers. Do you guys have any tips on how you might be able to expand your donor pool, get more from your donors, and kind of raise the bar from a goal that you usually set for your, maybe it's your big gala of the year? What can organizations do to get themselves from one goal kind of up to the next level? And are there any ways to kind of improve the status of what they do, their donors kind of? I'm throwing out ideas because I'm not sure myself, but Sarah and Natasha, do you guys have any thoughts?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think there's a couple different pieces. One of them is speaking with your donors in advance, especially your strongest committed donors, and let them know what you're doing. Let them know we're doing this event, and in the middle of it, we're going to be asking for donations, and give them the inside scoop to let them know kind of what the plan is. So that's for your existing donors. For your maybe newer donors, or maybe more to your larger audience, I think it is a lot about communication. So thinking about an organization where maybe you have, let's say 100 donors, but you have 500 people on your mailing list. Your real goal should be to get more of those people from your mailing list to the event, with the idea that once they're at the event, they will make a donation. I think it's really important to be as inclusive as possible. And that's, again, why virtual events are so good. And also, I find that focusing on participation rather than dollar amount can sometimes help. So, if you have 100 people attending your event, also having the MC when they're calling out, who wants to give at this level, who wants to give at that level, when it gets below a certain amount. So let's say it goes down to $50. And then the MC can say, and any other dollar amount, we welcome you to make that donation now. Having the MC really focus on, we'd love to get every single guest making a donation today. And that way, if $5 is the doable amount for a donor, they're giving you $5 and they're feeling great about it. It's not necessarily about the amount, but it's just about them taking that action and really trying to drive the participation. And that in turn will drive your fundraising dollars. As well, on the back end of that is that post-event, I would recommend that you send out either a full recording of your event or just key highlights. And along with that messaging, and you send that to people who attended and also people who didn't attend, and you let them know, so far we've raised X number of dollars. We're so excited but the fundraising hasn't stopped. Here's the link. We'll be collecting donations until X date, and we'll make an announcement after that time. And then that way you're capturing people who couldn't attend for whatever reason, or people who might not have made a donation at the event and who are now inspired to do that.
Fantastic. Natasha, anything you want to add?
I think Sarah hit the nail on the head on that one, so I'm happy to leave it there.
Awesome. The next question that I have is around creating really impactful moments during your fundraisers. So a lot of people are kind of saying, we got to take virtual events to the next level. It's time to step it up. We're all about engaging. So do you have any examples? I know you mentioned a few. Maybe you want to re-articulate those or even bring up more of ways that you can kind of create these really special moments during your event where people can be really engaged, like these really memorable moments that will happen during virtual events. What are kind of different ways that organizations can use those to spice up their virtual events?
Yeah, so I will sort of piggyback off a comment or a story that Sarah mentioned earlier on with that entertainment piece happening in the artist's living room. So they were originally supposed to come to the studio and they did it from their home. And I think right now with these virtual events, people just want to feel connected. They want to have those moments of connection. They want to build community with people. I think in our homes, there's this tendency that we can feel so lonely or so separated. And so for me, at least with these events, how can we bring people together so it feels like we're more than just tiles on the screen, right? So that artist, by doing it in his living room with toys in the background, with dogs barking, that makes it feel more accessible for people. And who doesn't want a concert in their living room? So I think from that standpoint, that's super engaging. Maybe not in like the typical way that you would expect, but for me, potentially more impactful.
Sarah, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that was an excellent example. Thanks, Natasha.
Awesome. Well, those are all of the questions that we have. Natasha and Sarah, is there any last words of advice that you have for charities, or maybe like one specific takeaway, if nothing else, what you think they should carry over to their next virtual fundraiser?
I think just go ahead and do it. There's going to be nervousness. There's going to be hesitation. There's going to be things that feel a little bit uncomfortable if it's your first time doing one, but I think just be bold and go for it. I think there's a huge opportunity, and organizations that are doing virtual events are all without fail seeing some really, really great and tangible results. So I say, yeah, just take the leap and do it.
I would echo that. And I will also say too that we've talked a little bit about budget, but the costs are going to be so different. And I think more so than an in-person event, the range or the spectrum of that budget can vary so vastly. I've seen events that spend $50,000 on audiovisual, and I've seen organizations spend less than $1,000. So I think the budget and the spend from a virtual event is so different. So don't be afraid to do what feels right and is within your organization's capacity, because like Sarah said, the impact in that fundraising, people are still hitting those goals. And it's not necessarily how much you're spending to make those dollars.
Definitely. Awesome. Thank you both so much, Sarah and Natasha. It was fantastic having you here. You had so many examples and so much knowledge to bring to the table. And I'm really hoping all of our attendees today, as well as all of the people who get to watch the recording months and maybe years after this webinar, I hope that they can benefit from it. Actually, I take back years. I hope that maybe this will outdate itself at some point and we can get back to in person. But for now, everyone has these incredible takeaways to bring to their next virtual event. So everyone on this webinar, please make sure to reach out to Natasha and Sarah so that you can get on a coaching call with them. Questions about an event you're running, about an event you have coming up, just go in, see if there's anything else you can do to just take it to the next level and advance your fundraising and maybe even your fundraising goal with their help. This will be recorded and it will be sent to you with a reminder of that offer too. So if you need to sit on it for a couple days, they have very generously stated that you can reach out to them within a certain time period. So no worries if you want to talk to the rest of your team on that, but please take advantage of it because they are here to help. And so is Trellis. So if you have any events coming up and you are wanting to run a gala, run a golf tournament, you have ticketing, auctions, whatever that may look like, we can support you too. So you're always welcome to reach out to the Trellis team or attend one of our demos if you want to learn more from what we know based on what has worked well for the charities that we see using our platform. So that is everything for today. Thank you all again for joining us. And thanks again to Natasha and Sara.
Thank you.
Thank you
Bye,
so
everybody.
much. Bye,
Have
everyone.
a great day.